Hello everybody and welcome to the Leading Edge Detailing Online Training Academy. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at polishing machines. The machines that I personally use, the machines that I have used in my business, the machines that are available to you in the market, and what my thoughts are about what you should start off with, what you should really focus on, and why you don't need some machines that you see out there in the market. Before we look at the machines that are in front of me, let's first have a little bit of a quick recap about the three types of machines currently available in the market. You have your traditional rotary polishing machine or rotary buffer. There is also the dual action random orbital, which is probably the latest technology and the one that I use. And you have the forced rotation machine. There are definitely pros and cons for all of them. And let's start off by talking about the rotary, as it is probably the classic and most traditional. This machine basically spins the pad in a circular motion. There is no science behind it other than high RPM. It is fantastic at cutting, but it generates a lot of heat. It does require a lot of care and attention when using, especially around edges, as you can quite easily burn through any thin paint or any edges that will get a little bit more force than the rest of the bodywork that you're working with. With rotary machines, you have to take extreme care when using them, as they generate a lot of heat, they spin at very high RPM, and the physics of the pad itself states that the further out you go on the pad, the faster the motion is, which means you have more cutting power. Where the closer you are to the center of the pad, there is slower movement and you have lesser cutting power. And by that default motion, it also means that polishing pads and polishing machines that are rotary will generate more haze and will generate more of their own swirl marks, also labeled as buffer trails. Contrary to online common belief and what some people might claim, rotary machines never finish perfectly. In saying that, however, a very skilled user of a rotary machine will have such fine hazing that it is almost impossible to see with the naked eye. But the physics of the machine itself and the physics of the pad will always lend itself to be very aggressive in the cutting and not fantastic in the finishing, simply because the outside of the pad will spin much faster than the inside of the pad. With dual action random orbitals, the circular motion and the polishing motion is random, meaning that the outside of the pad does not spin or do any extra work than the inside of the pad. This gives you a very even finish, and because of that, it actually finishes off much better, as the pad and the machine itself does not cause its own haze and holograms unless you are using a combination of pad and polish that is too aggressive for the paintwork. Because of this random action as well, it is very unlikely to cause a lot of heat, so you're going to be less likely worried about burning through the paint and burning through edges, which makes it fantastic for beginner detailers to learn on, as well as professional detailers that work on sensitive areas. And whilst we will talk about it later on in the paint correction tutorials, because this machine finishes off so well, as long as you have the right pad and polish combination, you can cut very well and finish very well with the same machine. It does, however, have its disadvantages, and that is because it is spinning in a random motion, you have to be careful not to stall the pad. So whilst a rotary machine will have the cutting power to keep spinning no matter what happens and no matter what angle you have, a dual action random orbital will stall if you're not managing it correctly, and we will be focusing on that heavily in the paint correction tutorials. The third type of machine is what's called forced rotation. This machine actually has a unique process in the way it works and tries to be in between the rotary and the DA. It tries to be as a rotary as it forces the rotation in a circular motion, but it does not completely spin the pad in circles. It has a zigzag type of pattern to it, and that pattern breaks the circular motion. So it attempts to not create as much heat and cutting power as a rotary, and it lends itself to a safer way of managing the pad and the safer way of managing the paint. But it does that in a motion that is not purely random. It is a geared machine, so it does have a little bit of vibration, and from personal experience, detailers tend to either prefer the DA or the forced rotation. It is very rare where you find a detailer that uses both. So it's normally a DA kind of detailer a rotary kind of detailer or a forced rotation kind of detailer, but I will leave you to, I guess, go to a workshop and experience it for yourself firsthand. But because it is a forced rotation, it does mean that you don't have to be as careful with your angle, as the pad will not stall. It will continue to work if you have, I guess, tighter areas, and you can also change the backing plate sizes quite easily on the forced rotation, going from a big pad to a smaller pad, where with a DA, they tend to be weighted and balanced for a specific pad. Before we proceed any further with this tutorial, I do wish to highlight a misconception that is often shared in the online community, and that is a rotary machine is like a scalpel for a surgeon, which is very precise and very dangerous, whilst a DA tends to be a much softer approach. That is not very accurate, because both the tools do the same job in the right hands. What I would probably liken it to is that a rotary machine is like an axe, where you are sort of swinging very hard, taking big chunks, and if you're not careful, you can either hurt yourself or cut the wrong thing, where a DA is more like a chef's knife. You might be able to cut big pieces of meat with both knife and axe, but the knife will give you a cleaner cut, but it might require more work, where an axe will give you a rough cut, but you can chop through some serious bones, and if you're talking about trees, some serious logs, where you can't kind of do that with a knife. So that's the best way to explain them, because calling a rotary machine a surgeon's scalpel is very incorrect, because if all surgeons used the equivalent of a rotary machine, there'll be many more people dying on the surgery table, as it is much more risky and harder to use as opposed to a DA or a forced rotation machine. Without any further digression, let's talk about the machines in front of me, going from the smallest to the largest, and discuss the difference in between them and when to use them, and then we'll finally talk about which ones you should start off looking at buying. The first one is the Humble 1-inch machine. So this is a Ripes hybrid. There are different machines available in the market that you can look at that have a similar size pad. Whilst it is still a DA, it does have an attachment to make it rotary, which gives you great versatility. A machine like this is fantastic for very small areas. Think about A pillars and B pillars of classic cars that are very thin, or little areas on side skirts and bumpers, even maybe some interior polishing, where you need that very small pad to fit in a very small place. And the best thing about it is, and as I mentioned, with rotary machines, the bigger the pad, the bigger the cutting, the bigger the risk. But when you're dealing with a small pad like a 1-inch, you can quite safely use a rotary function. So this is fantastic for edge work. When you're dealing with something very close to a trim and you really can't get the bigger machine to fit in that small section, this is fantastic for it. I do like using it as a rotary more than a DA though, because as a DA, it doesn't really have much cutting power. Stepping it up to a 3-inch, again, this is a Ripes. This is almost a necessity for any professional detailer. You must have a 3-inch machine, and you're going to be using this on pillars, mirrors, bumpers, side skirts, doors that are very concave or convex, really any areas where your 5-inch or 6-inch pads can't spin freely in there. So I very highly recommend using a 3-inch machine. I believe this is a 12mm throw, and I'll talk about throws in a second. Stepping it up from there is this machine here. Now this is not a Ripes, this is a Flex. I am yet to try this. This is a battery powered Flex, and this is a 15mm throw DA that takes a 5-inch pad, but you can also run it with a 6-inch pad, which is what's, I guess, enticed me to buy it and try it. It'll be nice to have one machine that you can switch different pads to. And then you have the big boy, which is the Ripes 21, and that has a 21mm throw with a 6-inch pad. You will use this big machine, the Ripes 21, on your flat surfaces, big doors, hoods or bonnets, depending on where you live in the world, roofs, pretty much big flat areas. So you can really plow through some serious defects depending on the pad and product you use with this machine. The 5-inch is the sweet spot between these two. You can still get some really decent cutting action with it, and obviously fantastic finishing work, but because it is a little bit smaller, and it doesn't sound like much to go from a 6-inch pad to a 5-inch pad, but it's actually, I believe it's around 30% less surface area, so it's a lot smaller. That 1 inch makes it a lot smaller. You can get that in between a lot of different crevices, concaves and convexes on modern cars that are very difficult to polish with a 6-inch machine. You have heard me mention the word throw a few times now, so let's talk a little bit about that. With a rotary machine, I mentioned that the pad is circular and it simply just spins in circles. So the bigger the pad, the faster the outside will spin, the slower the inside will spin. With a DA, the way it works is that the pad doesn't just spin in a circular motion, but it oscillates side to side. The more it oscillates, the bigger the throw. So the bigger the throw, the stronger the cutting power. So let's have a look at this flex. It will oscillate. It's a little bit of a tight motor. It will oscillate side to side to a maximum of 15 millimeters. No different to the Rupes LHR15. It means that there is 15 millimeters of side to side oscillation, and that's what gives you the cutting power. The 21, on the other hand, oscillates a 21 millimeter throw. So it gives you a much bigger side to side motion, which is why the 21 cuts much faster than the 15. Not only is the pad bigger, but it oscillates more side to side, which gives you the cutting power. Finally, you have the LHR12, and that has a 12 millimeter throw side to side. So the smaller the throw, the more it acts like a rotary. The bigger the throw, the more cutting power it gives you. So you need to always factor in the throw as well as the size of the pad. This flex machine with a 6-inch pad logically will not cut the same as a 6-inch pad on a Rupes 21, because the 21 has a bigger throw, it will cut more. But the flex, because it has a smaller throw, the 6-inch pad on that should theoretically work on tighter spaces than a 6-inch pad with the 21. And we'll go through that more later on in the tutorials. Finally, and before we wrap up this tutorial, let's talk about what machines you should buy and consider as you're starting off. For me personally, I think every detailer needs a 3-inch machine. All modern cars have small gaps and intricate parts. You will most certainly need a 3-inch machine. Now, whether that is wired or battery powered, I will leave that up to you to research and decide. I'm very excited to try this, and I want to see how long the battery will last. After that, you have a choice. You can either go for a 6-inch or a 5-inch machine. Personally, I went with the Flex because it has the option to put both pads on. I have not used it yet. I cannot give a recommendation if it's a good machine or not. But if your choice was a traditional 6-inch or a 5-inch, for a beginning detailer, I would recommend you go with the 5-inch because you can do more intricate areas of the car without switching between machines. In saying that, if you do have a 6-inch machine and you have a 3-inch machine, you should be able to do pretty much any car on any surface. And even if you're dealing with odd shapes on doors and fenders and things like that, any area that you cannot reach with a 6-inch machine, you can get to with a 3-inch machine. So if you're looking at buying two machines, grab a 3-inch and grab a 6-inch. If you're looking at just one machine, which is far from ideal, but I know that budget constraints for a beginning detailer is something to consider, go for a 5-inch because you can at least still do some bumpers and some mirrors kind of safely. And finally, if budget permits, consider a small 1-inch machine, especially if you're dealing with a lot of classical cars. Really, the way you're going to be using these machines are in combination of each other. Normally, you will do the big flat surfaces with a bigger machine, but because the pad oscillates, as I mentioned, the closer you get to an edge of a panel, you will not be able to address the scratches and swirl marks there, or you will be much less efficient. Because if you go over that panel, you might either hit something or you're really not going to be doing much because you're going to be over the edge. So for edge work, you'll be looking at the 3-inch or at the 1-inch. For big flat surfaces, you're looking at the 6-inch. For complex shapes that are, I guess, medium in size, you can look at the 5-inch. Or if there's a machine that you can switch pads with, definitely consider something like this Flex. Before we wrap it up, I do want to highlight also one other thing that I have personally tried and I have seen online. And some people say, just grab yourself a 5-inch machine repairs or a 6-inch machine repairs and change the backing plate, and that way you can use both pads. Unfortunately, that will not work. As I already mentioned, the LHR15 or LHR21 refers to the throw. So if you put a 5-inch pad on a repairs 6-inch machine, you are still going to be getting the 21mm throw, which is fantastic for cutting, but the machine is actually balanced for a specific weight, and you're going to have a lot of vibration, which is going to take away from your ability to finish and cut properly. You're also going to be prematurely wearing out the bearings of your machine. So it will not work if you change a 21mm throw designed for a 6-inch pad to a 5-inch pad that is still a 21mm throw. So don't do that. I've tried it. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So these are the 4 machines I have. The reason I did not ever buy a rotary machine is I didn't feel the need to. I would think of myself as a chef that likes to fillet the food very accurately, not hack it up with an axe. So if you're a beginning detailer, the risk of buying a rotary machine is no longer needed. The technology of IGL's microfiber pads and wool pads with IGL F1 gives you fantastic cutting power without the risk associated with burning through the paint that you normally have with a rotary machine. So that is my personal opinion on the subject. I am a believer of the less risk you take in some aspects, or take risks as much as you want, but it needs to be a calculated risk. If it's an uncalculated risk, you're just giving yourself headache. So these are my choices of machines. I have multiples of them. Very excited to try this one out in the next tutorial that I'm going to be sharing with you. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And as I mentioned already, we're going to be going through a lot more detail later on in each and every single one of these machines, the pads and the polishes and how to use them, tips and tricks. But I hope this tutorial has given you a little bit of an idea on what machine you need to buy for your detailing business or setup at home. Thank you for watching.